So writing for me has been therapeutic in a way where it's not just like doing the research and it's not just the writing. It's that when I write, I have to metabolize things because that's how I write. Like I always like take this piece over here and take this piece over here. And like then I kind of, meld them together. And that's how my brain works, which is great and sometimes also awful. But for this purpose, it's been really great because I sort of take this piece over here of like, here's this thing that I'm having trouble with. And here's this thing I know about the church. And like, then how do they intertwine, and maybe how can I unintertwine them? So it's been incredibly therapeutic for me to write about it. But from the first article that I wrote, I also started getting messages from people who were like, this was also my experience. And I'm so thankful that you're writing about it. I'm about to start crying thinking about it because I like other people were that for me, right? I listened to other people's podcasts and like even just like news stories that I watched or heard from like the 1980s. All of those pieces allowed me to start healing. Like they're a part of the healing process. They don't in and of themselves heal, but they allowed me to start healing. So anything that I can do for other people to be that voice, to just be like, here's my experience, and if you had a similar experience, I'm really sorry. I didn't realize how powerful that was.
Hey there, and welcome to the Reclamation Room. I'm Ashana, and I'm so glad you're here. This is a space for women reclaiming themselves after narcissistic abuse. If you've ever felt like you were too much, not enough, or both at the same time, you're in the right place. I created this podcast because I know what it's like to lose yourself in overgiving, overperforming, and still wondering why it never felt like love. I've walked through trauma, toxic relationships, and the long road of self-reclamation, and I'm here to walk with you. In this podcast, we'll explore what it means to come home to yourself after the confusion and chaos of narcissistic abuse. Some episodes will be solo, others will include guest interviews. All of them will be honest, grounded, and deeply compassionate. So, whether you're just realizing what you've lived through, or you've been on this path and you're ready for the next layer of your healing, you are welcome here. This is not about perfection. This is about reclamation. Welcoming everyone back to the Reclamation Room, the podcast for women healing from narcissistic abuse and complex trauma. Today we are in the studio with Allison Bishins. She is the author of Meet Me at the Ruins, and she writes under the pen name Luna Westish, which I love. So cool. How did you come up with the name Luna Westish? I love that.
Oh, I actually had a different pen name and was using it for years on TikTok while I was writing my story because I was writing this novel chapter by chapter on Kindle Vella. And I was actually making a little bit of money as I was writing it, which was really cool. So,
That's
like,
cool.
my husband wrote a book and published a book. And at one point, I had made more than he had, like on Kindle Vella, than he had on his actual published book, which was great because it was like a lot of, like motivation to keep going. But then Kindle Vella sort of imploded and then actually stopped existing. So like it's not a resource anymore, which is really unfortunate. So I was using this pen name. And then when I went to go actually publish my book, I Googled that name, like just to check. And there was an actual person with that name who like didn't really exist online like 2 or 3 years before when I had picked the name. So I wanted something that was like a little quirky, but one that you would probably spell it right or that spelled close enough to like actually find me. So it was just kind of this bouncing around different names, and we toyed with some like place names at one point, but it was just kind of finding something that felt like it still could be reflective of me, but also being easy to Google because I work in social media marketing and business planning. Like that's my real life job. So like I'm aware of how important SEO is.
Yeah, super cool. So, okay, I have to ask, Meet Me at the Ruins. Did you read Outlander?
No, I've seen like 5 minutes of it. Like maybe 10 years ago. Did it exist 10 years ago? Like a long time ago. I saw like a couple minutes of the movie, but I've never like read it or seen it, or I think I'm mixing it up with another thing. What's the one with the woman who goes back in time? Is that
That is
Outlander?
that is
Oh,
Outlander.
okay.
There was a movie
Okay.
called Outlander like way back when.
And then they made it into a TV show.
Okay, so I think I saw like 5 minutes of the movie and then maybe also 5 minutes of the show, but I've never really been into it. And I have had lots of people tell me that I should be, but no, I haven't seen it.
I started reading that series when I was like 13, so it's been
Yeah.
around for a long time.
Yeah, I
But
studied abroad in Scotland in like 2002 or 2003. And it was very different back then. Like when I went back this year with my kids in order to do a little bit of like final research for the book, but also just because I really missed it and it had been like 15 years since I'd been. And there were so many tourists, like so many. And then we looked at doing a day trip and there were like 70 million different Outlander like day trips. And I was like, this is just an entirely different environment than I was exposed to. It was still amazing. It was still lovely. But it was just amazing like how many people have come to love Scotland in the same way that I have.
yeah, so you're like an OG Scotland
I think
lover.
so. Well, my dad actually, so my family like a long time ago is Scottish, like almost the Mayflower, like long ago, like a very long time ago. But my family, but my maiden name is Stuart, so there was always that like thread of sort of
Wow,
Scottish
yeah.
culture and like I don't know, affinity for Scotland. And then my dad had spent some time in Scotland. Actually with the cult that he was in. So I always had grown up with these stories of Scotland and how beautiful it was. And so I was kind of primed to study abroad in Scotland. And I'm glad I did. I absolutely fell in love with it. It's an amazing place. So I highly recommend that anybody who can get there, I recommend you do that.
Yeah, homework for our listeners. Go visit as
Definitely.
soon as you can. Okay, so you brought up, I'll just go ahead and like elephant in the room here. You brought up the cult.
Yeah, so I grew up in a cult. I did not know that I grew up in a cult, as most people who grew up in cults don't. And I actually didn't even know that I was leaving a cult when I left. So I left when I was about 22 years old. And I was like the first person in my family, really like maybe the first person I knew to leave. And I was just like, this isn't working for me anymore. It was incredibly hard to leave. I got a ton of really angry pushback from my family, lost a lot of friends over it, really didn't speak with my parents on and off for a very, very long time. Um, and then about 5 years ago, I just came across an article where the cult that I was in, which is called the Way International, was talked about in the national press as a cult the year before I was born. So when I was a kid, the story was that my parents left the official Way International group in I think like 1989, and after that it became a cult, which is obviously very convenient storytelling, right? And so I grew up my whole childhood thinking that people who were still in the Way International were a cult, which was very strange when I actually got to college and met somebody who was still in the Way International. And it was absolutely a cult. At one point, my parents asked me to ask her to like buy some books from like the library from the founder of the cult, Victor Paul Weirel. And she like took money with her to the convention. And then when they found out who they were buying it for, they wouldn't let her buy the books. Like very, very cult like, right? Really, really bad. And like said, like, oh, this person left the cult and then they died, and that was like their fault. Like definitely cultish. But I was told like that wasn't our experience with it. Our experience with it was really lovely and like love based and learning based and all these different things. And then 5 years ago, I was exposed to this article called The Way of Many from, I believe, the Washington Post in 1981, really calling it out as a cult. And then from there, I started doing more and more research about the Way International as a cult. And it was just like, oh man, there is so much evidence and reporting on this as a cult while my parents were still in it, which really led me to a lot of questions, like about our family and about my relationship with my parents and about their culpability. Because if you don't know that you're in a cult, there's definitely still some culpability there. But if you know that everyone else is calling your religion a cult, and you don't have like the self-awareness or the capacity, or you've been worn down so much to not have the capacity to reflect on that, then like what is your culpability there? Do you have more culpability because you knew it could be a cult, or because you were telling your kids a story about how it wasn't a cult. And it really also threw into very, very sharp relief so many of like the values that I had been told to hold dear to as a kid, and how many of them actually came from the cult. So just as like one example, I always thought like that my parents were like super, super hardworking, and that them instilling hard work in us was this kind of like, like Protestant American thing. And it turns out it was the cult. Like that was one of the founding values of the cult, was just like work yourself to down to your knuckle bones. And if you're hurt or if you are suffering, like it doesn't matter. You just keep going. You just keep working for like the glory of God, for the glory of the cult, for to honor your family and all these different things. And so it really has been 5 years of me piece by piece, like undoing what I thought was myself and figuring out what was actually me and who I am, and what was actually just the cult indoctrination of who I should be. And I feel like I've been working on this for like 5 years, and like I'm maybe 7% of the way done. Like it's such a slow process, because every year or even every couple of months, there's something new where I'm like, oh crap, that was the cult. This thing that I thought was me, or this thing that I thought was really important to me, or that I had grown up with thinking was really valuable, wasn't coming from me at all. And I'm sure that some people have to do that to some extent with their families anyway, like, right, like sort of reassess their values. But it was just like this extra layer of not not only did this not come from me, it really didn't come from my parents either. It came from like above them, right? And so then still again thinking about that culpability of the way that they raised their family and the way that they treated their kids, and unwinding a lot of that. It's been a very, very slow road, but I'm glad that I'm on it. And I'm glad that I'm still here to have that chance, because a lot of people who left the cult, or who tried to leave, or who were abused in the cult, aren't still here to take those steps.
Why are they not here, if that's okay to ask?
Yeah, I don't know numbers, but there are several documented cases, especially of women in the cult being sexually abused and then committing suicide, either fairly soon after or further down the road. There are also some really wild stories from like the 70s and 80s of people hitchhiking across the country because they got told to by like leadership, like, oh, you need to go out to California and start a new fellowship, and then not making it. Like, like then like these people have never been found again. So I don't have like statistics, because in part, when the Way International split kind of in two in the 1980s, one group stayed with the Way International, and one was no longer a group. It was what we call splinter groups in churches. So like this is the main group, and then off of that you have what the Way International called offshoots. But in cult terminology, they're called splinter groups. And because there are so many splinter groups all over the world, but especially in the United States, but they all have different names and different leadership, it's actually really, really hard to track abuses. And so I know my story. I know one of my siblings has had a story of abuse in the church. I know things that have been documented of people whose names I knew because I knew them from the church, and then how things happened after they left, like the River Road Fellowship, which I don't know that story super well, but if anybody is interested in, that's one of the splinter groups from the Way International. And that's one of the stories of people not being here today to try and work through all of this. So I'm not a cult expert, and I wouldn't even say that I'm an expert on the Way International, just because I am still learning, and because these splinter groups make it incredibly hard to document the scale of abuse that's still happening, or that has happened over the last like 20, I guess 25 years since the Way International sort of split in two.
Yeah. Well, I like that, even though you say you're not a an expert. It's really important that we do share our story and our experience and our theories and what we have pieced together, because a huge theme of what I cover here and in my volunteer work with domestic violence is the more we stay quiet about it, the more these things can continue. And cult narcissistic abuse, like this is a podcast for women recovering from what we have seen now is called narcissistic abuse. but regardless of which flavor, right? Because the things that you're saying here, they're very similar. We've lost our sense of self. We don't know which way is up. We've been indoctrinated. We've been conditioned. Like now we've learned that the things that we've gotten used to are actually harmful. Oh my gosh, like we've woken up from this fog. There's this pushback from various communities of like, you're just being over dramatic, or now you're just saying that everything is a cult or everything is narcissistic abuse. And it's like, that may be the case in some situations. You know, there's exceptions to every rule, but let's not immediately use that as a reason to rule out what this person is saying. Like every person, we've got to hear them out. We've got to hear what they're here saying because that is the perspective that they're carrying around with them and how they're viewing the world, right? And so it's just really powerful to me to hear, like, especially upon waking up and realizing not only is this not from me, but this is not from my parents either. This came from the church. And so there's different nuances to that too. Like this could be a negative trait. This could be a positive trait. This could be things that we've picked up that we've actually been, that was really endearing. And I value this in myself. And now we're looking back and we're saying, hey, wait a minute. Oh my gosh, I don't feel like I can claim this. This doesn't feel authentic. What has that been like for you in figuring out what is authentically you?
I mean, I don't want to sound over dramatic, but it really has destroyed me in a lot of ways. Like, I came to this sudden realization like a year ago that one of the reasons I'm a good teacher, because one of the things that I do IRL is I teach business to kids. And one of the reasons I'm really good at it is because I was trained from an extremely young age of like how to write a sermon. And I like this hit me like a ton of bricks like a year ago. And I was just like, holy F. Like, what do I do with this? Because I do see this as being like part of who I am, of being convincing, but not like necessarily trying to convince people of my position, but rather convincing them in the value of my position, whether or not they agree with it, like that there's inherent value. For example, I teach in my business classes, I teach kids a lot about self-awareness and confidence and setting boundaries and how important it is if you're going to run a business that you have to be able to set boundaries. And if you're currently not able to, you have to practice that. It's like a muscle that you have to strengthen. And I'm not trying to convince the kids to like go out and immediately set boundaries. I'm trying to convince them that this is something we're thinking about, right? So it's not like I'm right. I'm trying not to replicate those, sort of cult views of like I have the right way, but just like that this is a way that can be, more healthy. And if it resonates with you, right? Sort of that's the always end of it, if it resonates with you. But sort of having that realization that like being a good teacher came from that indoctrination of how to write a sermon was soul destroying. Like it was worse, honestly, than the thing about the work ethic. Like the work ethic was the first one, the first sort of lightning bolt that hit me like, oh, this isn't me. This was the cult. And then there have been a bunch of other ones. I've had to do a lot of therapy around food because there was a lot of control in the cult about food and food beliefs and being like a perfect vessel for God that was like well trained and like properly fed with like healthy organic foods. And so sometimes I'll just be like eating, I don't know, a kale salad, and I'll just be like, wait a minute, did I want a kale salad? Or I'm still indoctrinated that I am supposed to be skinny and I am supposed to be beautiful and I'm supposed to have long hair and I'm supposed to, be available for other people to like physically got that. Like there's just so many things that have just hit me so hard. And basically every time it's happened, I've had to go through either like therapy or just a lot of processing. And I started writing about my cult exit about 3 years ago on Medium, just using that as a way to like wrap my head around everything that I was thinking about. And I've talked about how like food culture and the cult and rape culture in the United States in the 80s and 90s really just did a huge number on my like self-confidence, on my relationship with food, on my relationship with men, and my relationship with myself. So it's incredibly hard. I don't wish it on anybody. I mean, I say that I wish it on the people that are still there. I wish that they do have to go through this process and that they get the privilege of going through this process, because not everybody does. But at the same time, like, I know what's in store for them. I've only been really, sort of like latent processing this for 20 years, but only really actively verbalizing what I'm going through and the challenges that I'm facing and the things that I'm learning about myself and the cult for about 5 years. And I still feel like I'm just this little baby doing it. Like, I still feel like it could be 30 years from now, and I'm still going to feel like I'm like in the trenches, if that makes sense. So I think that it's a really hard position to be in. And I think that we should believe women. I know that the likelihood that we will, in believing thousands of women, accidentally believe a couple of incorrect stories or stories that are remembered incorrectly or things that didn't happen, it doesn't matter. It's always worth believing women. It's always worth believing survivors, because women are systematically abused in our culture across the world. It's worse in some places than others. I just wrote an article that's not out yet about how I was only able to come out as non-binary when I stopped working in a corporate environment, because I was so frequently sexually harassed in that corporate environment that it reinforced that I had to be a woman. Like, that is so screwed up to me that, like, I think that probably were I in a different environment or raised in a different way, I probably would have come to the realization a very long time ago that I'm non-binary. But the constant sexual harassment was actually a reinforcement of my parents and my cult version of womanhood. And that is so messed up to me. So I'm still, just processing these little things as they come up. And from other cult survivors that I talked to, they have similar experiences where they might just suddenly remember something. They might just have a memory that comes back to them. I wrote an article, an essay a few years ago, because I just had this memory that just came back to me with this huge force of being woken up by my parents in the middle of the night because they had gotten back from this long trip and we were staying with friends, and they picked us up like in the middle of the night in our pajamas and put us in the back of the car and took us home. Now, I have no idea why that memory was repressed for like 35 years. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. It's not necessarily a bad memory, but just like, what is this trying to tell me? What is my brain trying to tell me that it's suddenly releasing this information? And I know it to be true. It's not like a fuzzy memory where, like, I'm not really sure what's happening. Like, no, I vividly remember this. And I remember as a kid remembering that, if that makes any sense. And then somehow for years, it was just gone. So what is that? Is that a memory about my insecurity in my family? Is it about my parents' selfishness of the choices that they made? Is it about the fact that I was wearing a nightgown that I absolutely hated the fabric of, but my parents wouldn't replace it? Like, what is it about that memory? So I think that there's so many different layers to the undoing that you have to do when you come out of any kind of complex trauma. And as a non-mental health professional, my experience is that there are so many layers to this, and they will just knock you on your butt when you are not expecting it. And you can just like move past it, which sometimes I feel like I have to do. And then sometimes you get the opportunity to really dig in and figure out what this means for you and how to move forward. Because a lot of times that's the challenge. It's like, okay, if I know that my work ethic and my teaching abilities maybe come from the cult, what does that mean? Do I just decide that I'm not going to do those things anymore? Or do I have to find a way to reclaim this for myself and who I am? And even, before I came out as non-binary, like the same thing was with womanhood. Like, what of womanhood am I willing to hold on to? And I mean, that's still a question for me, even though I consider myself to be non-binary. Part of it is that our definition of womanhood is so narrow. I think if we had a more expansive vision of what womanhood was, it wouldn't feel so oppressive to me. But our definition of it is so narrow that I have to kind of keep going back to it and saying, like, is there anything of value there for me? And sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no. But I've had to unwind that relationship of myself to gender in the same way that I've had to unwind my relationship to food or religion or even family ties and friendships and things like that. So it is not an easy process. And I know folks who've been had trauma in other ways, and I see them going through similar processes where it's like you might be in stasis for a while and then suddenly you're just so out of whack and something has just come up for you, and it just could be months that it might take you to get back to sort of any feeling of normalcy. But usually on the other side of that, at least for me, there's been some recognition of like, okay, so now I understand. I don't understand all of that, but I understand the like little pieces of it, and that's helpful to me. Like just building, kind of what I said about boundaries. Like I almost feel like leaving a cult is like you have to continue strengthening those muscles. You have to like keep doing the work, and then if you don't do the work, and you just kind of atrophy a little bit, and that's okay. I actually feel like sometimes we need to take a break, and that's okay. But then when we are ready, we do need to keep moving, and then just like do acknowledge to ourselves the work that we have done and how strong we are for having done that work. Because I think it's really easy as a cult survivor, even one that was raised in the cult and I didn't really have a choice, still to put so much blame on ourselves as being weak or unthinking or like non-critical, all these different things. And so I think it's important to acknowledge when we are able to make steps towards like a more whole sense of self that's outside of that trauma that we're coming out of.
Yeah, what you just said is like my entire philosophy summed up in one sentence because I am deeply, deeply passionate about validating people's experience because that's the perspective that they are working with. Like you'll hear me say it over and over again, and it doesn't matter if you don't think that it happened that way. It doesn't matter if you think it's stupid. That is their working memory right now. Okay, like they don't have the capacity to just install another processor and keep going in a different direction. And as humans, we need connection. We need that to survive. Somebody's got to sit with them. Somebody, you know, and that's not to say that it's everyone's responsibility to be there with that person. There's a self accountability there that needs to happen. But I believe that when we've sought connection and we've been hurt, or we've sought connection and maybe we've gotten it and then it was taken away, or we realized that it wasn't real, it was an illusion all along, sometimes we don't really know how to do that in the moment. And that's why I do this, because I'm like, hey, I'm going to sit here with you. What's your perspective? And number one, I'm really sorry about what you went through. It's awful. But number two, I'm really glad that you have your voice in the way that you have it in what you are going through, because I know that it's going to help other people. And you spoke about something really, it gave me chills. And it's just this sense of what we've been through kind of took a part of us away. And we don't really know what the real us is. We have to figure that out. And then there's that added layer that's just like grief. And then like maybe there's some gratitude in there too. Like there's so many things of realizing, oh, a part of who I am is the person who went through that. That is a part of who I am, for better or worse. And there's an unraveling there too. And so I want to get into a little bit, if it's okay with you, what the writing process has offered for you, because you said that you write on Medium, you are a published author, and little known fact here, I also left I don't want to say a cult, but I left a community that I was pretty much ostracized for leaving the community, which I knew was going to happen. I left quietly. I didn't make a stink about it. I didn't share a big mic drop moment of like, this is what all I've found out about this spiritual leader. You guys should look this up. I left quietly, and I let a couple of friends know. I just want to let you know I left the community. Like, I'm still here. It's the same for me. I love you just the same. And over 100 people have blocked me, like not just unfriended me, but like blocked me. And this is people that I spent years of my life with, right? So I'm hearing what you're saying, and I'm like, yeah, I would not wish this on anyone, but I wish it on them. Like I love them. I want them to be able to realize what they need to realize in their own time. And so I've written a little bit about that too, but I want to hear what your writing process has been like. What has that brought for you? What pushes you to keep writing? What do you get from it? How has it helped you?
I love that question because I think that writing can be different things for different people. Like the process of writing can be very healing for a lot of people. And it is, in this context, very healing for me because every time I've written an article, I've done a little bit of research to like make sure I'm not like off base. Like I wrote an article when I finally named the cult, which took me a couple of articles to do because even though I don't have much of a relationship with my parents, I had sort of a minimal one, mostly for my kids, so that they could still know their grandparents. And in right before publishing the third article, I got an email from my mom that said, "What you're writing about me is lies, and you will never hear from me again." And so I updated that piece, and I said, like, here's the content of that email. I haven't otherwise updated this. And actually, it's really interesting because what I've written about the cult has been pretty innocuous when it comes to my parents. Like, I've tried to be pretty generous with my interpretations of their actions. And I actually haven't written about like the worst abuses that I experienced and that I know other people have experienced. I've kind of like slow pedaled a little bit just to like see how I felt about writing about it and how I felt about having that voice. Because up until that point of me starting to write, I had been not necessarily silent, because there were a few people I had spoken to about it, and like I had spoken to therapists about it and things like that, but I hadn't used my voice in that way to help other people. And so I kind of was like kind of like inching through it. And then when I got that message from my mom, I was like, okay, floodgates open, right? Because like, if you can't tolerate me saying that you were controlling about my food in high school when I was also physically abused, and I haven't talked about that yet, like, we have so much further to go. Do you know what I mean? And so it just was really interesting to see. And also, like, my mom, I don't let her follow me on social media. So somebody was showing her these articles, right? So who's showing these articles to people like to get me in trouble, right? Like, that's a really interesting element of that as well, because I'm pretty sure it's somebody in my family. And I don't speak to my mom anymore, so I don't speak to my dad anymore. My brother like barely speaks to me, kind of only if we're in like the same space, he'll like kind of say hello, but he has no desire to have a relationship with me, which was devastating at first, because he was actually the one that I was closest with before I left the church. And then when my relationship with my parents deteriorated a couple years later, he was like, if they're not talking to you, I'm not talking to you. And I basically haven't had a substantive conversation with him in 20 years, which is crappy. Like, I don't wish that on anybody, right? Like, I don't think that family is the be all end all that our culture makes it out to be, but I do wish for people to have relationships with their family if they like them. And I don't have that choice right now, and that's actually okay with me. I've gotten to the point where I'm like, I am going to set boundaries about who I am and what I need. And if that doesn't work for you, that's okay. Like, that's okay. And so sometimes I have some grieving around that, but I thankfully am like through most of that grieving process. So writing for me has been therapeutic in a way where it's not just like doing the research and it's not just the writing. It's that when I write, I have to metabolize things, because that's how I write. Like, I always like take this piece over here and take this piece over here, and like then I kind of, meld them together. And that's how my brain works, which is great and sometimes also awful. But for this purpose, it's been really great, because I sort of take this piece over here of like, here's this thing that I'm having trouble with, and here's this thing I know about the church, and like, then how do they intertwine, and maybe how can I unintertwine them? So it's been incredibly therapeutic for me to write about it. But from the first article that I wrote, I also started getting messages from people who were like, this was also my experience, and I'm so thankful that you're writing about it. I'm about to start crying thinking about it, because I like, other people were that for me, right? I listened to other people's podcasts, and like, even just like news stories that I watched or heard from like the 1980s, all of those pieces allowed me to start healing. Like, they're a part of the healing process. They don't in and of themselves heal, but they allowed me to start healing. So anything that I can do for other people to be that voice, to just be like, here's my experience, and if you had a similar experience, I'm really sorry. I didn't realize how powerful that was before I started writing. And so it's been healing on this sort of secondary level of being able to help others heal. And that's actually become quite important for me, because I had this, sort of one of these lightning bolts for myself a couple of years ago, that I was really complicit in the cult when I was in college, because I ran a Bible fellowship and I was the one doing the teaching. And I had to really sit with that for a while. Like, what was my intention at that Bible fellowship? Like, what was I actually teaching? Was I replicating the teachings of the cult, or was I just teaching kind of the portions of the Bible that resonated with me? Because that's kind of where I had been headed before I went to college, is I had been questioning for a very long time. um my parents have always said, like, oh, I was the black sheep of the family, blah blah blah. So like, it's not like it was new when I left, but in college I was still really invested in it, and I was trying to make it work for myself, right? So I was trying to only teach on things that I thought were right. And so like, I wasn't anti-abortion, and I wasn't anti-gay marriage at that point, even though the cult was. And so I was letting go a lot of the pieces that didn't fit for me. But I have actually written some amends letters to some folks back in the day who I recruited into the Bible study, or into our like Sunday fellowship that I went to at someone else's house, and really apologized for the complicity that I had in bringing them into that system, even at a time when I knew that like the majority of it didn't work for me. And so that was a really therapeutic writing process as well, writing those apology letters. And I do recommend thinking about doing that. If you feel like there's a point in time where you were complicit, you could write it to them and never send it to them, or you can write it to them. I asked permission before I sent it to them. So I think that that's a helpful step, and make sure that you get consent before you send somebody something that can be really triggering. But and I think I got, a couple of yeses, and then a couple people just didn't respond, so I didn't get to send them. But I have to be okay with that. That's their choice, right? Like, that's the boundary that they're setting with me. And so, but writing those letters and admitting to some of the complicity that I did have, and also forgiving myself for that time period where I was really struggling and trying to figure out what I needed in life, out of this foundation of religious extremism. And I was doing my best, right? And so that's really interesting too, because then I think back on like my parents' complicity. And I do think that to some extent my parents were doing their best, but I also was physically abused. So it's like, okay, so we can, on one hand, hold this idea that sometimes indoctrination can make you complicit and not realize what you're doing, but also it's never okay to hurt children. It's never okay to hurt anybody. So, how do we reconcile those two things? And it's my personal belief that you just can't. And you kind of have to be okay with that inability to reconcile those two things, even within myself. So, like, if I did something harmful in college when I was inviting people to Bible fellowship and stuff like that, that's not okay. And at the same time, I was indoctrinated and doing what I was told to do and struggling with it, but not able to exit yet. And so there's like forgiveness here and not here. And I think that's okay. I think we can forgive people for some of their actions and not others. And there are a lot of people who are like cult experts, and they will say like, your healing is best like when you forgive them for everything. And I'm like, no, like, I'm not going to forgive my parents for spanking me so hard with a wooden spoon that I had bruises. Like, I'm not going to forgive the leaders in my community who sexually abused children. Never. I'm never going to forgive them for that. So don't ask me to. But at the same time, I can see that some people, myself included, sometimes my parents, my siblings, may have been complicit because of indoctrination. And like, how do you reconcile that? And I do think that that's, for me at least, that's really tricky. I know that was a very long answer, but this is a very
No,
complicated topic.
yeah, I love this conversation. I feel like you and I could have an episode for like 3 hours straight, because as you're talking, I'm like, yep, yep. And you touched on something. See, this to me, what you're sharing parallels narcissistic relationships, narcissistic homes, toxic, abusive family relationships. It's the same thing to me. Um, and it was very precious listening to you share your process of coming to terms with what you had done because those of us who have been in situations like that, we all have that moment, right? And it can come in one moment, it can come over the course of years. It can be something that happens until we take our dying breath and we realize something and we're like, oh, I need to make peace with that in some way. But you're talking about how you shared these beliefs with people in college. And it's such a stark reminder that like we're not infallible, because even if we think that we have great discernment, we're still operating from a system that has something in there from someone else, right? We have mirror neurons. That's how we learn to do things. We're constantly growing, we're constantly evolving, changing the way that we see things, hopefully, if we're growing, right? And that's why I say that we're not infallible, because what works for me doesn't work for you. And so I can't apply my same logic to you and it be perfect in every situation. And so when you're sharing that, I'm just thinking like, that is what it is to be a person who has compassion and who has empathy, and to experience these painful situations that it's difficult to apply compassion and empathy. It's difficult to see in those moments that those people are even capable of compassion and empathy because of what they did. And yet here we are still having this deep visceral awareness of like, this is not a good thing. I don't want to treat people this way. And it's heartbreaking to have that realization, body chills moment of like, even after what we've been through, we still have that desire not to hurt other humans. And that is what lets us look at these people and say, you are a human too. You are struggling too. You're not infallible either. I get it. And so I love how you shared this concept of forgiveness. I love the discussion here because I'm like, okay, this is really fascinating to hear and to dig into. I had a college course recently that we had to write an essay on forgiveness, and we had to conceptualize what it is. And when I was writing that, I honestly had no idea what forgiveness was my entire life. I really didn't. Like I thought I did, but I had carried around these stories of what had happened to me and what people had done to me. And even though I said that I forgave them, I still really wanted someone to hear my side of the story and sit with me and validate, yes, that was awful. I think when my personal experience, when I stopped wanting that, that was when I was able to say, okay, I can forgive them. You know, I definitely don't agree with what they did and I don't condone it. And our values are not the same. And so it was a very personal experience of what forgiveness is to me. So I'm wondering if you feel comfortable sharing, what would you say that forgiveness is in your personal definition after what you've shared?
I've never tried to like define it out loud, but I think that there's some really interesting layers between like um being okay that somebody did something in the moment because they didn't have better options, and being angry that they did it, and being angry that it happened to you specifically, and also being like maybe loving somebody because they're your family member or somebody that was close to you, and also knowing that their behavior in any context was unacceptable. And so for me, forgiveness looks like letting it go. And I think that to some extent, if we use that definition to some extent, I have forgiven my parents because I never expect them at any point in their lives in the future to come back to me and say, we were wrong. We were in a cult. We abused you. We're sorry. And we would like to repair this relationship. I have let go of that and I have peace about that. So, like, I'm no longer grieving that. So, for me, grieving was a big part of what I think people would consider forgiveness. But the interesting thing is that I think we're saying the same thing, but I would say I don't forgive them. So I think we're taking the same steps and we're trying to get to the same place. But for me, that's not forgiveness. That is acknowledgement of human infallibility and human error and also evil. Like, I don't even know that I believe in the concept of evil, but I believe in the concept of people doing evil things. And I think that people who are narcissistic, for example, are actually drawn to cults that have these types of control structures. So when you're saying that they're similar, I actually think it's more than that. I think that there's overlap. There's a lot of overlap between people who are narcissistic or people who would be primed to abuse children are attracted to structures that allow them to have that control. And so what's really interesting to me is if my parents had never been introduced to this cult, what would my childhood have looked like? Honestly, probably still a lot of control. Some good things too. And there were some lovely things that my parents did and some things that they did right. And what the cult that I was in really prioritized education, which is very unusual for cults. So I feel very, oddly, it's so weird to say it, but I feel lucky to have been in a cult that prioritized education, because I've always really loved learning and going to school and reading and writing and things like that. And if I'd been in a different cult, that would have been impossible for me. So it's like really strange how these things shake out. So like, I think that my parents, did a great job of like encouraging us in our education, but then it's like also like, okay, but they did that because the cult told them to, or did they do that because they were also highly educated? What's really interesting to me about forgiveness is I think that there's like 10 different emotions and needs that are all wrapped up in that one word. And I think you can forgive one person in a different way than you forgive another person. Like my sister left the cult about, I think, like 15 years after I did. And she was pretty awful to me a lot of those 15 years about how I had like ruined our family. How I like another sibling said that I was cancer, like on the family. And it was brutal. And when she finally left, she has apologized to me 100 times for the way that she's treated me. And I have said to her many times, like, I can forgive you and still be upset about it. I can forgive you and still be angry that you treated me that way. I can still hold you accountable for your behavior while forgiving you. And I think that that's really foreign to a lot of people. I think a lot of people like leave cults and want to be immediately forgiven for all of the bad things that they did. And I don't think it works like that. It doesn't work for me like that on a personal level. So why should I apply that to someone else? Why should you be absolved of all of the terrible things that you've done just because you finally realized that you were doing it under a control structure? So I think for me, and maybe just because of the nature of leaving a cult, forgiveness is so wrapped up in grieving, and also in grieving like the loss of future apologies. I don't even know how to say that. I know that I'm not going to get an apology from a lot of these people, and some of them are
So
dead.
is it
And
a lack of closure, a lack of validation, a lack of connection over it? Like what
yeah,
I wonder what need that is.
it's really interesting because I think that part of it is that education piece where everybody or so many people in this cult were really highly educated, really did have critical thinking skills, really were very smart people, like people who you would not put in the box that people say of like who would be a good like cult follower. And what I've realized is that that box is actually a fallacy. Like there's no box. All of us in some circumstances could fall into some type of control structure like this, whether it's financial or wellness or religion or education. There's lots of different types of control structures that mimic cults. But I think that's what's so hard is my parents are so smart and they're so educated and they are so um, eloquent in talking about, politics or history or art or anything, but it's like, how can you be this smart and have zero capacity to think critically about your own behavior? And so I think it's the need of like, so it's not validation so much for myself because I already am validated. I don't need that from them. But it's more like I need them to do that. I need them to like get knocked off their asses, and I need them to start healing and them to start examining their behavior and them to start making amends, because I think that their position and most of my family's position is whatever bad they did, you have to just forgive them for it, period, and then move on. But they've never apologized, and it's not like they've never apologized saying I apologize, but they've never done anything that indicates any desire to go any deeper, to talk about it, to help me, through it, to, and nothing, no type of apology, not just the words I'm sorry. So for me it's not validation because I'm past that point. I'm past the point of needing validation. I don't care what they say. But at the same time, there's something like very deep inside me that wants them to have that self-awareness to see what they did wrong and start to remedy it. We could have a 3-hour podcast just about like starting a list, and you can't move forward unless you can say, I behaved badly, I hurt you, that was wrong, I know that it was wrong, here are the underpinnings of why that's wrong, here's how I learned from it, and here's what we're going to do next to remedy this. And sometimes remedy looks like not having a relationship. Sometimes it looks like improving a relationship. Sometimes it might look like going to therapy together. Sometimes in the United States, it might look like reparations. But I think that there's like, for me, there can never be true forgiveness without accountability. And so I still hold my parents accountable for what they did. I still hold my sister accountable for the way that she behaved, even though those two things are very, very different. And I can still forgive them at the same time. But my sister has worked on accountability. She has apologized. She has asked me what I need from her to fix the situation. And in that situation, I've said, I actually don't need to. I feel like I don't need to forgive you any more than I already have. Like maybe I didn't 100% forgive you because I'm still going to remember that behavior and how it made me feel, but I'm not assigning that behavior to you at this time, if that makes sense. Like I'm not projecting it back onto you as like as though now you're a bad person, right? Like we've gotten 80% of the forgiveness and like let's just rest there. Maybe at some point the rest will come. But with my parents, I can forgive some of their complicity because they were indoctrinated, but because there's no accountability, we will never get anywhere near what I would consider like true forgiveness, where you can have a whole and loving relationship after accountability. And I think that's what's missing from so many family relationships. And there's a reason that so many people my age, I'm 43, don't talk to their parents anymore. There's a reason that there's this huge like gap in the generations where there are so many people who are saying like, if you can't love me for who I am, and if you can't be supportive of who I am and the choices that I make, I don't want a relationship with you. And I think that what's missing there in many of these relationships is accountability of the parents making mistakes and apologizing for that. And this is something that I try to model with my kids, where if I do something wrong, I sit them down and I'm like, I was an asshole. I'm really sorry. Like that was inappropriate. This happened 2 days ago. I was really tired and we were watching this TV show and they kept asking questions that were like really obvious if you had been paying attention to the TV show. And I kept snapping at them. And like, I can be grumpy, but I don't normally snap at people. And so I was just like, I'm sorry, don't know what's going on. My brain is just like firing on all these different cylinders because I'm really tired. Like, it's not you. It's just like, I mean, like I'm annoyed at you, but it's not your responsibility that I'm having that behavior. Right. And that's what kids should learn from their parents, in my opinion, although I think experts would agree to a great extent, is that parents are not infallible. We make mistakes. And if you think about what you said about those college students should have been having critical thinking, it's actually really interesting to think about the fact that the human brain doesn't fully develop until 25. So is it anybody's business to be teaching religion to kids? Is it anybody's business to be doing religious outreach in colleges? Colleges are one of the places that the Way International used to recruit people, and they still have a significant involvement on the campus at Bowling Green University. And this is because those brains are not fully developed yet. And in the United States, I think we don't train people to think critically. So I think that all of us are like extra ripe for cult exploitation because of the way that we teach people in school to follow authority, to follow instructions, to not listen to ourselves or our own bodies about what we need. Well, you can't use the bathroom during class. You can wait until after. Well, you have to eat lunch at 11 o'clock because that's what I said. These are things that basically groom children to be sucked into a cult or to stay in a cult if they're already being raised in that environment. So something I've been grappling with lately is like, how do you teach your kids what you value and what you believe about the world without dictating what they believe about the world? And so I know I'm making mistakes, and I know my kids are probably going to need therapy, but I also know that we inherently have a different relationship than that of mine and my parents, because one, I'm not hitting them, but also I try to keep myself accountable. Like I don't always do it right. And sometimes maybe I'm even so embarrassed that I don't even do it. But for the most part, I try really hard to, when I make mistakes, own up to them and model what it looks like to not just be accountable, but also to figure out repair. Like, okay, so I made a mistake and it really hurt you. So what do we need to do to get to the point where you trust me again? Or where you feel like I'm not going to, say that critical thing that I said, whatever it is. And I didn't have anybody to model that for me. I still don't. Like, I still don't. I'm still learning how to do that. But I do wish I'd had somebody to model that for me of like, I hurt you, whether or not it was my intention. And how do we move forward? Not just like, how do you get over it? Because I feel like that's my parents' perspective. How should Allison get over this? But like, how do we actually repair the relationship? And that requires both sides. So I would like to like invite people to be angry and to hold people accountable. Or if you know that those people will never be accountable, to just grieve that and then move on, acknowledging that you're never going to get the apology that you need. You're never going to get repair in that relationship. Even if you maintain some kind of relationship with them, it's never going to be what you need. Because honestly, like, when you have a parent who's participating in abuse of any kind, unless they go through that process of accountability and repair, they're never going to be the parent that you need. So you can have them be the parent that you don't need and have a relationship with them, or you can have them not be the parent that you need and not have a relationship with them. You get to choose that, right? I know sometimes it feels like you don't have a choice, but when we really think about it, when we really dig in, we really do have a choice about those relationships. And that, just like throwing it back to what we were talking about earlier, that's why writing is so helpful for me. It's just me processing my thoughts, processing my grief, processing the physical impacts of trauma, processing my chronic illness as it potentially is having like an overlap on the Venn diagram of like my cult experience and my the epigenetic trauma and all these different things. And I read something really recently that really was so interesting to me, because I think in our day and age, especially if you were raised as a woman, you were told to always sort of like see the positive in anything. Oh, if you're being sexually harassed, it just means he likes you. Or like, if you got groped, well, that means you have a cute butt. Like, right? Like, first of
Even on
all,
the playground, if that boy's making fun of you, he likes you. He's just teasing and flirting.
But if we, I was reading this, I teach social media marketing to teens, and like half of the class is about safety. And essentially, social media is not safe for teens. I'm happy to go into that more, but it's not. It's not meant to be. It's really the opposite. It is meant to be manipulative. It is meant to be damaging. Period. Happy to do a whole podcast on that. But one of the things that I was reading was it's really important to me to not just present that information, but share like what we can do about it. So I went to I think it's the Association of like Academic Association of Pediatric Psychologists. One of the things that they suggested is, instead of like thinking of positive things, like when you're down or depressed, instead of thinking of positive things, think of neutral things. So for example, if one of your friends is in France and you're like mad that you're not in France, that you couldn't get to France, instead of saying, I'll get to France one day, you say like, you know what? I might never get to France, but I get to go to Colorado next week. And that's really cool. And that blew my mind as somebody raised in an environment where I was always expected to have a happy face on. I was expected as a woman to always solve all of the problems and always like know how to fix it, but also to always just literally have a smile on my face. And that was just like so eye-opening to me at like 41 years old. I was like, no one has ever said this to me. No one has ever said that when you're having a hard time, sometimes neutrality can be a really helpful alternative. And so that's how I see forgiveness. I think culturally we see forgiveness as that positive spin. I'll definitely get to France one day. I'm going to meet my love of my life within 9 months. But I think that sometimes that neutrality of saying, I'm going through a lot right now, but I'm also becoming stronger. And my voice is becoming stronger, and I'm becoming a better writer. And I am changing my relationship with my children and not replicating those same things. That neutrality for me is a different kind of forgiveness that's so much deeper than just somebody saying, I'm sorry, and you having say, I forgive you.
I love everything that you just said, because, and this is such a good example. This is why I love podcasting, because every single time I meet a person, there's a connection happening. We're not just talking at one another, where I'm actively, deeply listening to what you're saying, and I'm diving into it. I'm on this journey with you. And I love that when I was able to share, like, I think I have a different perspective with you. Can I hear some more of yours? Everything that just came out of your mouth was just like, people need to hear this. This is so important because that was so like deeply nuanced beyond just what you had first shared about forgiveness. And it speaks to those layers that you were talking about. So I'm really glad that you were able to share that in a way. Like it's so important that we, even if we don't think that we believe the same as another person, like I said earlier, just hearing them out, just being curious. You don't even have to hear them out, but just hell, be curious. Be open-minded that there's other perspectives than your own. And as you were talking, everything is deeply resonant for me as someone who also grew up in an abusive home where that's never really been admitted. Um, it's just it's not going to be. And there's been family members who have said like you should just forgive them because they had a hard childhood too. And I'm like, how on earth does that put anything on me that I should be forgiving people? So, thankfully, I'm very grateful that I have come to a place of like I'm okay. Like I love that you gave birth to me. I'm so grateful that you brought me into this world. Thank you for that. But that doesn't mean that I have to believe the same as you. And that doesn't mean that I have to, let my kids be around that. I don't believe in treatment like that. Um, but as you were speaking, I think about what I've heard other people say too, right? Like it's these memories, like you thought of something that you read recently. And I remembered scrolling, like I was probably on Facebook or something, and I saw someone share that what's wrong with today's generation or these generations these days is that we validate every little thing, right? Like it's not we don't need to validate every single feeling that they have. We need to like teach them how to be resilient and push through and do the thing anyway and how to function. And like we don't just need to constantly validate. And I'm just sitting here listening to how you're sharing and we're talking about children here and protecting children and we don't want to be assholes. We don't want to teach our kids that that's how we communicate, right? And it was very simple for me in that moment. I was like, here's the thing. If we're going to be negative about this, like, oh, y'all are just validating everything that they're feeling. If you're in a relationship with someone as an adult in a romantic partnership, wouldn't you want that person to have the capacity to be able to validate what you're saying, even if they don't believe the same thing? It's so simple, right? Like,
Yeah.
we want people to be able to have that ability because that's how we have constructive communication, right? Like, conflict sharpens our communication and our ability to connect with one another. We just have to be able to do it in a way that something comes of it.
Hmm. I do think there's such a difficult line though about that. Like I see you, you see me, we just need to communicate and we'll be on kind of on the same page when you're talking about people who are still invested in control structures or who have recently left and have not assessed their accountability in those control structures. And so when we have people who are in our lives and we want to understand them, I do think that that openness and that curiosity is important. But for me, that stops short when we're talking about harm. And unfortunately, the conversation that we're having today surrounds that harm that is done to us as children or us as adults. And I think that when
Yes.
there's harm involved, that's a really important line because I think another thing that happens to survivors is that we're told we have to hear someone out. We have to hear their side of the story. Like, oh, he didn't abuse you. He was having an extramarital affair with you. Okay, well, he being 40 years old and this other person being 18, and he's the leader of the church and they live in his house. Like, no. So I think that I know I'm pushing back on you a little bit, but I think that it's really important that as survivors, wherever the boundary is that we feel like we have to stop engaging with someone's beliefs because they become harmful, we are allowed to draw that line.
Yep.
And so I love this conversation that we're having. I think it's super fruitful. So I'm not talking about this conversation, but I think that sometimes, again, it's that like toxic positivity that like if you just listen to them, if you just hear them out, you'll hear why they didn't really abuse you. Like that's not how that works. So I think that discourse is so important. So I do think that I just want to encourage folks to yes, be open and listen to people and ask people for more information or if something sounds intriguing to ask them what they mean by that, but also feel free to draw those boundaries when someone else's opinion gets to the point where it wishes you harm or wishes you to not have the rights that you should have. Or there's so many different layers here of harm that are very normal in conversation right now that are actively harmful to folks. So I would encourage, I think that part of being an adult and certainly part of being a trauma survivor is allowing yourself over and over and over again to have boundaries and also to have self-awareness of your needs. And that we have to, I think this happens with survivors too, because in some ways we have this delayed maturation because we were not told as adolescents or as children that we were allowed to have boundaries, that we were allowed to draw boundaries, that we were allowed to have our own feelings or needs or instincts. And so part of my desire for the next generation is that they hold tight to those instincts and they listen to those instincts and they draw boundaries, but they're also self-aware enough to understand when they've made mistakes. And so I think for a lot of trauma survivors, they need that encouragement. They need that little push to say, like, if you need to set a boundary about something, like, you're allowed to set whatever boundaries you want, and then other people have to choose whether they accept them. And sometimes that can be the harder part of setting boundaries, but we should still be practicing setting boundaries for our own health and healing.
Yeah. It's very well said. And I just want to say, I don't see it as you pushing me back. So I actually love the direction that you took that, because when I'm thinking in terms of children and like people saying you shouldn't validate all of your children's emotions, right? What you just said, that is why I believe that we should validate their emotions and how they're feeling. Because if they're not validated in how they're feeling, they're indoctrinatable, right? Like they're
Yeah.
going to not be able to set boundaries. They're not going to know how it feels when their body tells them no. They're not going to know how it feels when it's like, oh, this is actually really uncomfortable for me and I'm frozen right now. Instead, they're going to be able to use their voice and say, no, I don't like that. So I love where you took that. I didn't think it was pushback at all. I was like, yes, like keep going. This is what people need to hear. There's so many nuances. And I'm really, really grateful for the insights that you shared here. We didn't talk about your book very much. Is there anything that you want to share about your book before we do close?
Yeah, I actually want to share one thing about my book, which is really interesting. And I mostly share this to share that if you think that writing could be helpful for you, but you don't see yourself as a fiction writer, I encourage you to try writing fiction, because I did not see myself as a fiction writer. But from like the third page of this book, the main character had anxiety and social anxiety and was super awkward. And like, I did not mean to draw her that way. She just came out, and it was really therapeutic in a way to like draw this character who was we would say now has like mental health issues, but the book is set back when I studied in Scotland, so it's set in like 2003, when we were not having conversations about mental health in the same way that we do today. So she's constantly like, why do I feel so different from other people? Why does human interaction seem easier for other people than it is for me? And it was so interesting to write a book and have this character just sort of fall out of my fingertips and like fully formed. Like, I had never even thought of who she was, except that maybe like she was, I don't know, 7% me or something like that. You know what I mean? But like, to have her fall out and be neurodivergent and struggling and awkward and horny and all these different things that sometimes we don't allow ourselves to be, or we hide them, we mask them, right? And I think that it was so interesting to me to get to the end of that book and reread it and just be like, I did not realize that this person was so neurodivergent, like so anxious, so struggling, and also not having any support system in place, because we didn't have any scaffolding back then. We didn't have really ready access to therapy. We probably didn't, a lot of us didn't have access to, like, maybe antidepressants or anti-anxiety meds. And so it was really fascinating. And so in that process, I was actually like uncovering some like experiences of my own that I didn't understand, like why they had happened a certain way, or why, like, there's a scene where the protagonist tries to explain to a male friend how many times she's been sexually assaulted, and tries to get him to understand that like it's not a big deal anymore because it's happened so many times. And it was like so devastating to write that and then go back and read it and just realize like how much we were expected to hold back then, and how little permission we had to talk about our challenges, to talk about the trauma that was happening to us, to question things, to present as not perfectly womanly, all these different things. So for me, writing fiction ended up being almost as much of a therapeutic exercise as writing these like researched, thoughtful, cults questioning articles, that like it allowed my brain to do some things that like I think that there wasn't space or creativity, or like the I wasn't like ready to go that deep maybe in an academic way, but I was able to somehow access some of these things through a character. So if you have any inclination to do anything creative, whether it's art or playwriting or, you know, filming stuff or like whatever it is, I just encourage you to try, because that's not why I started, but I'm so glad that I did, because I realized that it allowed me to access different like muscle memories of things that had happened to me, and then allowed me to on paper like write how I would have wanted people to respond, or write how people did respond, and then get angry about that, and then like grieve over it and move past it. And I didn't expect any of that from writing fiction. And so my second book, which I'm not very far along, is a rom-com set against the backdrop of somebody leaving a cult. And so it still be a lot more specific to like my experience leaving a cult. But we'll see like when I ever finish it. But I've kind of turned to where I'm more willing to talk about that aspect like in the book, even though it's fiction. But I really encourage folks to just like to do things that you might not be good at, and allow those creative things to help you, regardless of whether you're ever going to make money on it, or whether anyone's ever going to see it, or whether you feel like you're ever going to be good at it. Like if you weren't good at cooking, would you just like never cook again? No, your body needs sustenance. You would find a way to get the nutrients that you need, right? I think our brains are like that sometimes. Like we're just like, well, I'm not a good painter, so I'm not going to do it. Or I'm not a good reader. I'm not a fast reader, so I'm not going to read. I think that that's a fallacy that we've been taught. And that's actually, I think, very cult-like thinking too, where like you have to be the best at things because you have to be an example, right? That was a big thing when I grew up. Like you have to be the city on the hill that everybody wants to emulate. And so it's taken me years to get to the point where I'm like, I'm going to do things because I enjoy them, or I enjoy the process of learning, even if in the end result is going to be crappy. And I think that that's such a permission to give ourselves. And I don't think my book is crappy. I think it's well written. People seem to really like it. But if I hadn't been willing to be crappy at the beginning, I never would have written. So go be crappy. Go forgive yourself. Go hold people accountable. Go write. Go paint. Go jump in puddles. And feel free to reach out to me if you need some support. I am not a cult specialist. I'm not a mental health specialist, but I hope that this reaches whose ever ears it needs to today, to just say, you're not alone. A lot of us have had really crappy experiences, and there's a lot of different ways to heal. Therapy is one way, highly recommend it. But there are other ways to heal as well, like writing or art or hiking. You know, for everyone, it's a little different. And figuring out what helps you heal is just part of that coming back to yourself, of figuring out who you are. Like I think of a Mr. Potato Head. And if you're in a cult, every piece is the cult, but also the body is the cult. And so to become yourself, you have to take all those pieces off and replace the pieces, all the different pieces, and you have to figure out what fits back in. But then you also kind of have to take apart your whole rest of your body and replace the cult structure, the scaffolding that was there, and replace it with something that's true to who you are and the way you would like to behave in the world and the way that you would like to move forward. And so that's where listening to ourselves and practicing and flexing the muscles of self-awareness and self-care and intuition, like the more we practice those, the better we know ourselves. And that's part of the process of healing, at least for me.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That was a beautiful metaphor. I think it's a metaphor.
Yes, it's metaphor.
Ask the writer here. Okay. Well, Allison, where can people find you?
Okay, so if you're interested in talking about cult stuff or reading those articles, I'm on Medium as Allison Bishins, ALLISON BISHINS. I also have a website, AllisonBishins.com, where you can read other things and hear about my classes and get a newsletter, things like that. If you're interested in my book, it's called Meet Me at the Ruins by Luna Westish. It's available everywhere except for Hoopla, which I'm trying really hard because I'm a big library person. And so you can actually get it on, request it through Libby or Overdrive for most libraries. They use that system, but I'm trying to get it on Hoopla as well. But you can find it on bookshop.org, Amazon, all those places. And I'm working on the audiobook right now. So I'm crossing my fingers that maybe by the end of the year, the audiobook will be ready, because it is a labor of love and it's very, very hard.
Is it
hopefully
you reading it?
Yes, this is actually like breaking news. Recorded the whole thing myself. So now I'm editing all of it, which is just a huge slog. As a podcaster, you know how hard it can be to edit sometimes. So I'm hoping that by the end of the year, we'll have an audiobook that will also be available through your library, because it's a big accessibility issue for me. And then I'm on Instagram and TikTok are the two things I'm most active on, and it's just Luna Westish on those platforms. So thank you for having me today. It was a great conversation, and I look forward to hearing if anybody has follow-up questions or anything like that.
Yeah, I will. I'm going to include your information in the show notes. I had fun. This was awesome.
Thanks for spending time in the Reclamation Room. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if this supported you, consider sharing it or leaving a review. You're not alone, and your reclamation is sacred.